So in the second subinterval, we drew another omega 2 and we get another rectangle just like this. The base is equal to the subinterval and the height is given by the omega 2 at the point where omega 2 touches the functional value. So in this way, we can draw another omega. I've drawn three omega 3s over here. There should be another over here. And the Riemann sum is the area of these three rectangles plus this one. Now, there are two problems with the Riemann sum as I've defined it. First of all, as you can see, the subintervals are of different lengths. So that means we can take any subinterval that we want. And second is within each subinterval, the omega is again ad hoc. So that means both the subinterval and the omega, the length and height of the rectangles are chosen in an arbitrary manner. Therefore, the Riemann sum will depend upon the choice. So if I choose a particular subinterval and omega, I will get a particular Riemann sum. You will get a completely different sum depending upon your choice. So apparently, the Riemann sum is not well defined. However, we saw that if we could increase the number of intervals, so that means we have a fixed interval and we are increasing the number of partitions or subintervals. So that means each subinterval has a smaller and smaller width. What will be the limit case of this? The limiting case is the width tends to 0. So we can have an infinite number of subintervals whose width is 0. So in that case, instead of a rectangle, what we are going to have is an infinite set of straight lines. In such case, the limit of such a sequence is the area under the curve. Now, there are two ways in which we can choose omega 1. The first method is we choose omega 1 so that the Riemann sum generated is smallest. So basically, we are choosing omega 1 to minimize the Riemann sum. The second method is we choose omega such that the Riemann sum is maximized. So in the first case, the omegas are denoted by WL. So omega L1, omega L2, and so on. And if we are maximizing the Riemann sum, S max, we are getting omega H1, omega H2, and so on. So here we have the whole function and the interval is starts from 0. So the interval starts from 0 and this is the first subinterval. So let's focus on the first subinterval. So the first omega, what is the lowest value of omega? It is 0. So given the function, what is the height of omega? Or rather, what is f of omega 1? It is 0. So we denote this by a point. Now let's take another omega. See, the choice of omega is ad hoc. So instead of choosing this point, we could have chosen omega over here. So over here you can see that fx is greater than fx over here. So if we call this omega 2 and if we call this omega 1, f omega 2 is greater than f omega 1. We draw another omega over here, omega 3. So f omega 3 is greater than the earlier omegas. And so on, we continue to drop it. What is the highest possible value of omega? The upper boundary. So here you can see that f of omega over here is greater than all the other omegas. So this is the omega at which the area of the rectangle is minimized. This is the omega for which the area of the rectangle is maximized. So this is omega h1, this is omega L1. And apart from these two omegas, we could have drawn other omegas at any of these points. In these cases, the rectangle would have a larger area than this omega L1. It would have a smaller rectangle than the one at omega H1. So that means what we are, if you want to find out omega L1, it means we take each subinterval and choose the leftmost point. Okay. On the other hand, if you want to choose the omega H, which maximizes the Riemann sum, then we choose the omega such that it is equal to the right hand boundary. So that means if your boundary is xi minus 1 to xi, this is the subinterval, omega L is equal to xi minus I, omega H is xi. So you can see an illustration given over here. So the boundary is interval is 0 to 1 in both cases. The function is fx equal to 2x. And we have divided the boundary into 4 equal partitions. So the width is always 0.25 over here and over here. So in the first case, the left hand side, we are deriving the S main. We are choosing omega L1, L. There should be 4 boxes, but the last box is only a point. So it is 0. So we simply sum A2, A3, A4, A1 is 0, and we will get 0.75. You can see the calculation over here. The width is always 0.25, and you have the omegas are 0, 0.5, 1, and 1.5. If you choose 0, fx is 2 into 0. If you choose omega 0.25, fx is 2 into 0.25, which is 0.5. If you come to the right hand side, you will see that you have the same closed interval 0 to 1, which is partitioned into 4 parts. So the lengths are again 0.25 each. Now omega is chosen here. Previously omega was chosen here, 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 and here. Now we are choosing omega here, 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 and here. So we get 4 rectangles and they will be B1, B2, B3, B4. The sum comes to 1.25. So what is the difference? The difference is, as you can see, A2 and B1 is matching. B2 and A3 is matching. A4 and B3 is matching, right? So this is the extra rectangle, and this creates the difference. Now it is clear that if you take omega L, you will get S min. This will be an underestimate of the area. On the other hand, if you take omega H, you will get S max. This will always overestimate the area under the curve. Now, the point that we are making is that if you reduce the interval, so that means you're increasing the number of subpartitions so that the intervals gets progressively reduced. So ultimately what will happen is you simply get lines instead of rectangle. In the limiting case, what will happen is both S min and S max will converge to the same number S star. So that means if you take the limiting case, when n tends to infinity, S min and S max will give you the same value. So whether you take omega 1, omega L, or whether you take omega H doesn't matter. So this can be proved formally. So remember, the proof is basically we have to show that in the limiting case n tends to infinity, S min should tend to S max. So here we are using a slightly different notation. Instead of omega L, we will use omega underscore. Remember that if your sub intervals are like this, xi minus 1, then xi minus 1 is omega L. On the other hand, xi is omega h. So here we are taking omega L. So that means we have to take, or we have to sum xi minus xi minus 1. So here we have written the Riemann sum. Here, instead of omega underscore, we have put in xi minus 1. Now over here, see this. If you have n intervals, then the width of each interval should be 1 by n. Remember, the interval is 0 to 1. So we are basically dividing 1 into a number of n number of classes. On the other hand, this functional value f of xi minus 1, the function is 2x. So we simply write 2, and here this is I minus 1 by n. You can just check this if you want. So basically what you're doing is, if you take I equal to 1, this will be 1 minus 1, 0. So 0 by n. If you take I equal to 2, it is 2 minus 1. So 1 divided by n, and so on. You will go only up to n. So that means n minus 1 by n. See, this is the last value. Now you can bring out 2, you can bring out the denominator n squares, and you get summation of I minus 1. This is equal to n by 2 into n minus 1. And we simply substitute this. And this is simply algebraic manipulation. Try it out yourself. We will get 1 minus 1 by n. Okay. Now, if we choose the omega h, so we are maximizing S max. We are maximizing the Riemann sum. So that means we have to choose omega equal to xi, the right hand side of each subinterval. So the x max formula is given over here. We substitute uh, xi for omega, and the functional value will be like this, 2I by n. So we bring out 2 by n square and we get summation of I. So 1 plus 2 plus up to n, which is n plus 1 by 2 n. So substituting this, we get n square plus n by n square, which is 1 plus 1 by n. So again, you can check over here. So S min is equal to S min is equal to 1 minus 1 by n. S max is 1 plus 1 by n. So obviously S min will be less than S max. But if we take the limiting case, n tends to infinity. So 1 by n will tend to 0. So in that case, we get S min is equal to 1 minus 0. S max is equal to 1 plus 0. So the result is the limiting case is, sorry, S max equal to S min equal to 1. So if we can get this result, we say that the function is integrable and the limit is the area under the curve. Now over here, I've written a lot, but if you focus on the essential, what it basically means is that suppose you have a boundary, closed interval, A to B. In that case, you can find out the Riemann sum simply by using this. This line is important and this result is important. So if a function is integrable within an interval, what happens outside the interval is not our concern. So if a function is integrable within an interval AB, we simply take finer and finer partitions, n tends to infinity. In that case, the choice of omega doesn't matter, as we have shown. The Riemann sum will converge to some value L. So in that case, what we have to do is we simply integrate the function and then find out the value at B. We find out the value at A and deduct the second from the first. This will give us the Riemann sum. So in other words, you know the meaning of integral of a to b fx dx. So this is the limit in the limiting case equal to the Riemann sum. So this is the fundamental theorem of the of integral calculus. What we get is fb capital FB minus fa capital FA, or we can write it in this form. This will give us the Riemann sum. In order to get this result, the function fx has to be continuous, and capital X is the indefinite integral of small fx. Now, I will ask you to do these sums and check what your result is. So here you will require Ex. So the answer is given E equal to 2.71. Ex is equal to 2.71. Okay. So I hope you have done this. So I'm not doing it, but if any of you have any problem here, please contact me later on. Now let us come to some economic applications. So we have a capital stock, KT. So this is the capital stock at a particular time period, and IT is the rate of net investment. What is net investment? Net investment is the investment minus depreciation. So at any point of time, we start off with some capital, and during production, part of the capital gets depreciated. So some amount of investment must compensate for the capital which is destroyed. Net investment is the addition above this level. So after maintaining capital stock at KT, so suppose we have a starting capital of 1000, 200 gets depreciated. So part of investment must cover this 200 loss. And net investment is the investment above this 200. So if the firm makes an investment of 500, that is gross investment. Net investment is 500 minus the depreciation. 500 minus 200. So the capital stock goes up by only 300, not the total invest, not by the total gross investment. It goes up only by the net investment. Okay, so when the meeting finishes, uses the same ID and password. Now, okay. So we started off at KT, and suppose we are considering a time in the future. So time goes up by del T. So the difference between the two is the addition to capital stock. The average rate at which capital stock changes is the increase in capital stock divided by the time period, which is del T. So if we take the limiting case, del T tends to 0, then this term will be dk by dt, and this is equal to IT. So if you are given a change in capital stock and we are given two time periods A and B, you can see over here two time periods, one is A, the other is B. The area under the curve will be investment, and this is simply equal to this investment, the height of the different omegas into del I. So the shaded area is the net investment or increase in capital stock between the two periods. Now in this economic example, we look at the relation between net investment and capital stock. So this is the two examples. In the first case, investment changes discretely. In the second case, it changes continuously. So we have a firm in time t equal to 1. The initial stock of capital is 10 million. So we write K1 equal to 10 million. For simplicity, we assume that capital does not depreciate. The firm invests in new capital at a constant rate of 1.5 million per year. And this goes on for 3 years. So that means I1, I2, I3 will all be 1.5 million. So what is capital at the end of 3 periods? We start off with K1, then we have 3 investments. So 10 plus 3, 1.5. And this is 14.5. And if you want to find out investment, we simply take out this to the right hand side, K3 minus K1. And this will be the sum of the 3 i's. So 4.5. If you look at the continuous case, t is equal to 0. So K0 is 5 lakhs. Again, depreciation is 0. And the firm plans to invest at 600 t square over the next 10 years. So that means, sorry, there's a mistake over here. It should be K0. So K10 is equal to K0 plus, see, we are starting at 0 and the end period is 10 into IT. IT is given over here. So we simply have to integrate this. So this is the definite integral 0 to 10. So this is 2 lakhs. So the total capital stock at the end of 10 years is 7 lakhs and the increase in capital is this 2 lakhs. Okay. So let me see how far we have to go. Okay, we have nearly finished. Okay, let's see what we want to find out. Okay, now what we are seeing over here is that if we have an interval AB, right, and we want to find out the area under the curve between A and B, we know how to find it out. We take the integral of A to B and simply integrate the function. Now, instead of going up to B, suppose we want to take a subinterval. So suppose the interval is 0 to, it starts at 0 and ends at 10. And we want to take the sum not up till 10, but up till, let us say, 6. So this means we have to integrate not from 0 to 10, but simply from 0 to 6. So we can, instead of taking the entire interval, we can also take the summation over a subinterval. That is what theorem 2 states intuitively. Okay, so what we are seeing is we have 2 subintervals. Over here, and the Riemann sum was this, all this entire area. Okay. Now, if I want to take an interval, subinterval over here, we can also take, this will be the, this is the area that we want to find out. In this case, it will be simply we integrate from A to X dx. So we can take the Riemann sum from A to B. We can also take the Riemann sum from any subinterval. We could also have taken it something like this over here. between these two subintervals. Okay, so in this case, let us suppose that this is x, this is y. We would integrate from x to y. So if the function is continuous and integrable within this boundary a to b, we can find out the Riemann sum for any subinterval within this area. And this is simply what I've written over here. We simply take the definite integral over that subboundary, over that subinterval. Okay. So the meeting is ending in just 1 minute. I'll end it over here.